There we go. If you open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 3, we're going to look at verse 15 this morning. I know we've spent some bit of time the last several weeks in Genesis, and we're going to kind of wrap things up, at least in the early chapters. We're going to be, I think, chapter 12 next week, Lord willing. But we kind of need to finish up a few key aspects of this, and I do beg your grace this morning as we're trying a new program and making it all work, and so you know how that goes, and so we're hoping for the best, but we'll see how this all goes. But Genesis 3:15, there have been some great rivalries over the course of time that we're all very familiar with, and some of them are downright legendary. I mean, there's the quintessential Saturday morning routine of Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner constantly vying against each other all the time. But you have the comical, the cartoon kind of things, but you also have more down-to-earth rivalries like the Packers and the Bears, or the Packers and the Vikings, something along those lines, or the Cowboys and basically everybody. You have those kinds of things going on all the time. And those are there, and even corporations get in on the scramble sometimes because they're vying for, they're trying to put up new goods and services that they can offer people and say, hey, we really want your business. And so they come out with something before the rival across the street does, and they're constantly going back and forth. And it's kind of all in fun. It's kind of, for a purpose, but it's not necessarily bloody per se. But that's not always true of rivalries. Probably one of the most famous, or maybe infamous might be the better word, of those kinds of rivalries, especially when it comes to the American context, was that between the Hatfields and the McCoys. That one started just as the Civil War was beginning to wrap up, maybe not even quite wrapped up. And from what I could tell, it's honestly hard to gather exactly what led to what. But it seems like Asa McCoy was on his way back after having actually been in captivity for a while, on the way back home, and a raiding party attacked him and the people that he was traveling with. And one particular person, a Hatfield, I think probably singled him out because he knew who he was and killed him. And that started a feud that lasted really well over 30 years. Now, it wasn't necessarily something that was going day in and day out. There's vast years that go on, vast periods of time that go on where it doesn't seem to be a whole lot going on, but there are times in which absolute atrocities take place. There's one particular event, the New Year's Day massacre, in which I forget which family it was, but the one family was literally in their cabin asleep, the whole entire family, and the other family snuck onto their land and opened fire on their cabin while they were sleeping, killing children even as they were fleeing the cabin. It's terrible. And all kinds of other outside parties and militias were involved from time to time, and all kinds of political meandering behind the scenes was going on. And this just continued and continued and continued. And, of course, there's a love interest where Hatfield was interested in the McCoy, and then they were back and forth too. And that's not really what ended. I couldn't really tell what actually finally ended. It just finally died out, kind of. But it was 30 years, and dozens of people died in the process of this rivalry that continued on for way, way too long. But that's not the worst rivalry that we can point to. Unfortunately, as we begin looking at the pages here of Genesis chapter 3, we're going to see an even longer standing rivalry, but it's one that I think people are almost oblivious to, and yet it's going on all around us each and every day. In Genesis 3:15, as we'll read it in just a moment, you'll see that God, in a curse really against the serpent, tells the serpent, look, there's going to be a rivalry between you and your descendants and between the descendants of the woman, and this is going to go back and forth. And we realize this is why this matters, because we look at this. It explains why the world is the way that it is and why so much death has revolved around the circumstances that are really stemming from this moment. Millions, if not billions of people have lost their lives due to the rivalry that's described right here in the pages of Scripture. And I think more often than not, we don't put that together. Or we downplay it, think, it's not that big of a deal. It actually is. It's actually a very big deal. And it explains a lot of why the frustrations and difficulties that we have in life, why things are the way that they are. And that's what we're trying to work through here. So when he says that the seed of the woman would in fact crush the head of the serpent, we understand that that's never been in doubt, but it's under constant threat. And we want to trace that threat through Scripture and realize why it answers so many of the questions that we sometimes ask. And so this morning I want to look at the promise of redemption that is made, the promise of redemption that is portrayed, and finally the promise of redemption that is kept. And understanding the whole time that you can always trust the one who dies for you. You can always trust the one who dies for you. Let's start reading in Genesis 3:15. It says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is the promise of redemption made. There's a blessing and a curse here. You don't often get to hear that or have somebody say that, but somehow there's a curse that's being made, but there's also a blessing that's hidden right there in plain sight. But that's true. And in this sad little section, as the ramifications for the sin of Adam and Eve start playing out, God is giving and handing out the punishments on each and every one of the parties that's involved here. But there's a bright light of hope hidden in the curse that's laid out against the serpent. Arnold, in his commentary, calls this an etiology. It's just a really fancy word for the study of causes. It's an explanation. Why are things the way that they are? What caused this? Here's the cause of why we experience the things that we experience in this world, why it's so broken. And you only have to take a moment to think back about, okay, well, how is the world broken? Well, think about the pain, the suffering, the death, the causes that are going. Turn on the news for 30 seconds, like that. Like all of that comes back to here. That's why it's all a direct result of the curses that God pronounces against these parties. And we're going to look at these not in actual chronological order as which they're handed down, but we are going to look at each and every one of these. And to the woman, as God is talking to her for her part, her responsibility in this, he grants her and talks to her, and he says, I'm going to disrupt some of the most significant roles of your life. The things that give you meaning and purpose in life, I'm going to disrupt them. I'm going to change them. I'm going to make them something less than that. And some of those most significant roles that any woman can have in life is the relationship with her spouse, marriage, and children. And even included in that, sometimes just the longing for those very things. I'm going to disrupt that. That's what's cursed. I think it's important to understand that Eve herself is not cursed. Adam himself is not cursed. But the roles that they have in life, the things that make them, that give them significance and purpose and meaning in life, so much that we take so much credit for, we take so much enjoyment out of, God says, I'm going to disrupt that. And he does. And he takes from that the joy that was always meant to be there. But it's her roles that are cursed, not her. And that's something I never really noticed before. We always talk about being under the curse, and that's true, they're under a curse, but they themselves are not cursed. And we'll see that play out in just a moment. But you understand that for her, now childbearing and being just a mom, there's going to be an aspect of pain that's always involved with that. There's going to be a conflict that exists between her and her spouse and her husband, and she's going to experience it. And I think we've all experienced it. There's times we're just not on the same page. There's tension there. There's conflict there. Why is it so hard to do this? This is why. There's been a disruption. All because of here. Adam also is likewise not cursed, but his roles are. He's also going to feel the tension of that rift in the relationship between him and his wife, both vying for domination and control over the relationship. He's going to feel that too. But for Adam, there's also this other aspect. Rather than pain in childbirth, which obviously he can't have, we need to say that these days, it feels like anymore, but he can't give birth. But you have him, and the roles that he has is work. And we understand, like, work and the things that we do in life, that was always a part of God's purpose. We were always supposed to have a role, but he says, I'm going to take away the blessing and the ease by which that was going to happen for you. In other words, toil is introduced to this. And so here's the disruption of his role. You're going to work, you're going to still have dominion over the earth, but it's not going to come easy anymore. You're going to know what it means to fail. To put in the time and the effort and everything that you can think of to kind of mitigate the limitations of what you're working with, and it's still not going to work out, or it's not going to work out as well as you anticipated. You're going to experience failure. You're going to experience heartache and those kinds of things. You're like frustrated by this, but that's the curse that Adam has to now live under because you tried to take matters into your own hands. This is your life. And we've experienced that. We've experienced that we try so hard to make sure that things work out the way that we want them to work out, and it doesn't happen. You plant a garden and something else comes in and eats it, or it just dies, or there's a drought, or there's a flood. There's all kinds of other things that are going on. That's just one example. Every aspect of work is going to be affected that way. And it's not to say that men are the only one that work, that women can't work. We understand that, but it's going to be work as a human experience is going to be frustrating. And in the long and the short of it, even as Adam goes out and works and literally pulls up his food sources from the ground at the same time is going to be taking him back into it so that he might rejoin the dust from which he came. Eventually it's going to exact his life. He's going to know what failure actually feels like. No, those are those two. The serpent, though, is unique. He's cursed. He himself is cursed. Notice verse 14. The Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And then the verse we read earlier, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Cursed above the livestock, the beasts of the fields, you will be the most hated creature that I have ever created. I think time and reality has borne that out. It was not for naught that Pastor Love hates snakes. You probably remember him talking about that a few times, and I don't think he's alone. There are many of us that we don't like them. There's always the odd duck that has a pet snake for whatever reason. I don't know what's wrong with you, but whatever. But he said there's going to be this constant enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. There's going to be this tension, and there's a reason why they're not well liked. Victor Matthews said that God could have made Eve infertile. He could have cursed her in that way. God could have made Adam and cursed him directly and said, you're unable to work, unable to produce food, unable to survive. He doesn't do that. But when it comes to the serpent, he tells them, look, you're going to affect them. You're going to challenge them. You're going to bruise their heel. But the seed of the woman is going to kill you. It's never said about Adam and Eve. There is an element of hope there. That's why people look at this, Genesis 3:15, and it is often called the proto-evangelium. It's just a fancy word of saying first gospel, and it's been known that way for thousands of years. People looked at this and said, there's hope here. There's a curse, but there's hope here. There's a promise of something more. And even as God is uttering the words of condemnation against the serpent and says, you're going to die, Adam and Eve can look at that and say, there's a promise of potential life here for us. Now, it's not guaranteed. It's not automatic. Okay, you're human, then here, you have eternal life eventually, someday. But there's a promise of a possibility. But that's not true for the serpent. You're going to die. He's cursed. It's different from Adam and Eve. But here we are living in the not yet. See, that's a huge promise for God to make there. It is a huge promise for God to be here. And we already suspected that something was going on here. Because as we read through this previously, God had clothed them. Remember, the promise was always, the day that you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what's going to happen to you? You're going to... They didn't. They would, but they didn't. There was a grace there. There was a grace there. You're going to be able to have children. Things are going to be different. And we see that right away because God clothes them. He doesn't walk away and say, all right, you're dead to me and I'm done. And he walks away. He clothes them. There's a promise of hope. There's a promise of covering, a covering of their shame there. The fact that he clothed them. And now we see again a promise of something else, seed of the woman. There's something coming, something that's future. There's hope there. And I do think that's what 1 Timothy 2:15 is referring to. Yet she, this is talking about Adam and Eve, yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. That verse has always been debated. Like, what exactly does that mean? But I think there's a promise baked in there that it was always referring to the promise of a Messiah. A child will be born that will be able to save you. Always looking forward to Christ. And I think Eve genuinely believes this. Pastor Daniel and I were talking earlier this week about our passage here and trying to make heads or tails of it, because it seems like Eve has a much better understanding, almost a New Testament understanding of what's going on here than what she could possibly have from what's recorded for us in the text. And we kind of came to the conclusion that we probably have more of a Cliff Notes, a condensed version of what's going on, what was actually said here. We have enough. And especially looking at it from the New Testament, we can put bits and pieces together that maybe that she couldn't have directly from reading just this. But I think she knows more. And I think we can see that a little bit as we're looking at this. Because drop down to chapter 4, verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. That might not sound like much. But I think already that Eve is demonstrating the fact that she trusts God. She takes him at his word. You promised that a seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. You said as much. And she starts looking for that right away. That's why I think this verse is worded the way that it is. Right? I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Like, I think she's literally, all these months have gone by. All these, at least months, since she has been condemned and all this thing has gone, they've fallen, they're out of the garden, all these things have happened. She's finally conceived, she's bearing a son, and she's looking at this son and goes, look, it's here, he's here. The seed of the woman, that's what he is. The Savior has been born today. Let's celebrate. Doesn't realize. His name is Cain. He's going to kill his brother. He's going to smash the head of his brother, the righteous one. And right away we realize, you know what? This isn't going to be as easy as we thought. This is going to be hard. However, we also realize that God is determined to bring this to pass. And God says what he says in Genesis 3:15, not because he knows something. God's not looking down through the corridors of time and going, okay, look, how's this going to play out? Oh, I see it. Here, let me tell you some good news. This is what the future has for you. It's not because he sees something. He says this not because he hopes something. Like, these things have a habit of just working themselves out. I'm sure it'll be fine. It's not because he hopes something. He says this not even because there must be something. Like, well, something it can't end like this. That's impossible. It can't end like this. This is not the ending to the story that I've written. It can't end like this. Something better has to happen. It just can't end like this. Because God determines something. God will supply something. He's determining it. He said, I'm not going to let it end this way. I can tell you this is what's going to happen because I'm going to make it happen. You will have a child, a seed descended from you that will change things, that will end things, that will crush the head of the serpent. You just need to trust me. And I think Eve is trying to do exactly that. But it won't be long before that again is put to the test. Genesis chapter 6. We see the sons of God marrying the daughters of men, whatever that means and your take on that. But the threat of the promise is under threat. And we see God intervening, taking the one righteous family that's left before the entire human race is polluted by whatever is going on. And he takes them aside and he puts them on a boat and he wipes out every living being on the earth that the seed of the woman might come. And then it's under threat again. Just a few verses later, the Tower of Babel, it seems like the world is united in rebellion against God, trying to find and claw their way back up into heaven, making their own way. And God says, you know what? It ain't going to happen. And he goes in there and he confuses the languages and spreads them all out. And again, wrecking the rebellion. And again, preserving the promise so that the seed of the woman might come. And that saga continues to unwind and come about and come about and come about. See, we understand that we are under a curse, but we ourselves are not cursed. There's a huge difference there. The serpent is cursed. But the drama that started with Cain and Abel, it's just going to keep playing out. But we can see that through Scripture, and we can learn something about God. Let's turn over the promise of redemption portrayed. We could probably pick dozens, I would suppose, of passages in which we could kind of see some of these things, but we're going to start here. Snakes in the sand, right? Snakes in the sand. Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 9. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Drop down to verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Here's one of the next threats that we see taking place. The children, many years have gone by. Abraham has come and gone. Joseph has come and gone. But because of Joseph and the famine that Israel was experiencing in their land where they were, they migrate over to Egypt. They're not a huge group yet. I think it's 70 people or so when it talks about that in the earlier passages of Genesis. And they've migrated over to Egypt, and they've done very well there. God has blessed them. They're prosperous, and things are going on. But they've kind of almost, in a sense, overstayed their welcome. And now the Egyptians and this Pharaoh particular that does not know or remember Joseph sees the Israelites as a threat, and they are enslaved. And then beyond that, they said, okay, that's not working. They're not slowing the growth, so to speak. And so they start actually taking these children, these baby boys that are born, and literally throwing them into the Nile. I can only imagine how many children were thrown. I would guess hundreds of babies a day are being thrown to drown, to be eaten by crocodiles, to be eaten by whatever other aquatic life is out there. Just the exposure alone, everything else that's going on. It's a terrible thing. It's a horrific thing. But why do we bring this up here? This is a picture of Amenhotep the first. The Egyptians absolutely idolized the serpent. In fact, I don't know if you can see it really well or not. Right there, the very tippy top is a female cobra with a hood flared out. That was on their crowns very often. And in fact, it's not pictured here. But if you've seen any kind of Egyptian art, it's not uncommon to see that usually it's like a blue and white striped kind of a headdress that they wear on that. Even that symbolized kind of the spread out hood of a cobra, king cobra. They idolized the serpent. They really are, if you want to put it this way, like the snake people. They love it. Everything about it, their pantheon is built around it. Their concepts are built around it. Their art, everything they do is built around this. And so here you have really, literally, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman in conflict. And the seed of the serpent is quite literally taking the seed of the woman and throwing it into the river and allowing these animals and creatures and whatnot to destroy them. And here these descendants of Abraham, who God had made great promises to, are suffering terribly at the hands of these people. They're actively trying to destroy them, but they will not succeed. And God will bring them down. God sends Moses. He sends plagues. He sends and divides the Red Sea. He does all of these kinds of things. And we understand that Moses is the deliverer, but he's not really the source of all this deliverance because he comes in there by the means of the power of God himself and performs these signs, performs these wonders, and delivers them out and levels Egypt. Arguably the greatest superpower of its day. They never recover from this. Quite literally, God crushes the head of the serpent, and the people are set free. So you can trust God. You can trust God because he's going to bring about his promise, and it might take a while, and sometimes there's going to be suffering and other things involved with it, but God will bring about his promise. He guarantees it. But this is not the only instance. We also have a snake on a stick. If you look at Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. From Mount Hor, they set out by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the people became impatient on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we loathe this worthless food. Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many of Israel died. And the people came to Moses and said, we've sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against God, and against you. Pray to the Lord that he may take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten, when he sees it, shall live. And so Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole, and if a serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. See, after the release from Egypt, the people began to complain. Do you see already where this is going? Are they trusting God? No. The lesson that was right there in front of them, the lesson they should have been taking in the entire time, they've already forgotten. And they're complaining about what it is that God has given to them. They're like, oh man, we have food. We have to go outside and gather basically snow every day and eat this. Like it's free and it's right there, but we're so tired of it. We're tired of living in the wilderness like this. We want something different, and they complain. And so God sends these fiery serpents, snakes. Why? It's one of the more unusual stories that we find going on in the Old Testament. But remember, snakes were a symbol of Egyptian power. God is reminding them, this is what you want to go back to? That's what you want to return to? Like you do remember what I delivered you from, right? And all the things that you had left behind. They're literally taking your children and throwing them in the river to be eaten by crocodiles. And you want to go back there because they offer the all-you-can-eat melon and onion buffet. I mean, that's not a thing. You really want to go back there because you missed the onions. Really? There must have been some onions. That's all I got to say. Because nobody's doing that. But here they are complaining. Look, you get up every day and you have no responsibility other than go outside and gather together a handful of bread that I've provided for you. That's all you got to do. The whip no longer comes across your back. Your children are no longer being flung into the water. You have freedom. You have the ability to worship me. I've delivered you. The very thing that you've been calling out for years, for decades. I've done it. And now you want to go back. It doesn't make any sense. You know why? Because they've not learned to trust God. They're questioning God. They're questioning His goodness. They're questioning His faithfulness. They're questioning, will you fulfill your promise to us? And God demonstrates to them yet again, yes. And so Moses makes a snake out of bronze, an image, the very image of one of the serpents that's afflicting them. And he hangs it on a pole, and by doing so, he reminds them of who God really is. He sets it up in the middle of the tent, or the camp. I don't know how, I always think of a pole like more of a walking stick kind of a pole, but it doesn't actually make sense. I think there's probably something very tall, so that when he put up in the center of the camp, that regardless of where you happen to be in the camp, you could see it. And that communicates, like salvation is available to everyone. It's there. Look, all you have to do is look and live. It's available. It doesn't matter who your last name is. It doesn't matter whether you have access to some particular tent or not, or whether you can pay enough. It's right there in the open to do that. But the other thing is, why is it a serpent? Why not something else? Because I think it was symbolizing like that serpent had taken the curse of death for them. We're not actually told how that serpent is attached. Andy Naselli thinks that maybe somehow the pole and actually impaled the serpent. Nancy Guthrie actually looks at it and says, I think he maybe just nailed it right through the head. I thought, I like that one. It works. Crushed yet again. The head of the serpent. It's a dead snake. Because you've been delivered from the snake people. You've been delivered from those that want to do you harm. And yet they complain. There's a snake in a tent. We're actually going to skip this one, but if you want to read about it, it's actually found in Judges chapter 5, verses 24 through 27. We just don't have the time for it. But we're going to look at a snake and a stone. This one, the previous one, is actually the time where they're in the land, but they're still under the time of the judges. This is the time where they're not just a nation anymore. They are a kingdom. Saul is on the throne. David is there, but as a kid. And I think this is probably one of the coolest stories of all. 1 Samuel 17, verses 1 through 5. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. And they were gathered at Sukkah, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Sukkah and Azekah and Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up line in the battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And you're probably, if you're like me, you're looking at that and going, and? Look at how some other translations deal with verse 5. This is the New American Standard Version. he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with what? Thank you. Which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. Here's the NIV. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. Here's the Holman Christian Standard Bible. And he wore a bronze helmet and bronze that weighed 125 pounds. Scale armor. Imagine, in the wilderness, the sun is shining, and he's wearing, we'll call it copper-colored armor, coming out there, literally in scales, overlapping plates, protecting him. What does he look like? How about that? There he is walking out there, helmet of bronze, scale armor, walking out there, challenging the very armies of God. It's the army of the Philistines standing behind him. He's coming out down there probably to a central location and challenging them and defaming them and challenging them. And nobody wants to go near him. No, not today. I want to live. They won't go. And there comes David. This kid. I'm sure his brother's like punk-nosed kid or something like that, right? Here's this kid. What is that? Why does nobody go down there? They're all afraid. And you quickly realize, like, just reading from Samuel here, you wouldn't necessarily know, but we go through the New Testament, look back, and we realize, wait a minute, David, he's in the line of the Messiah. He's the one that God makes the promise to. Your kingdom will never end. And there he is, in the line of the seed of the woman, looking right there at the snake, and what does he do? Goliath is there challenging him and mocking him and doing everything he possibly can. And David walks over, he picks up a stone, flings it, throws it through there, and it goes through the air, and it goes right through his forehead. I looked it up. It says it sank. And I'm like, does that sank mean like ricochet, or does sank mean like sank? Like, you know, and you look it up in the Hebrew there, and actually it's like throwing a stone in water, it goes down. That's what happens to Goliath. Goliath is not just knocked out. That stone goes through his head. He's dead before he hits the ground. And then David goes over there, and he takes Goliath's own sword, because he didn't have one of his own, and he cuts off his head. Why? One, from a great distance, it's hard to know what even happened. So here's proof positive. He cuts off the head and holds it up. There's no doubt now in anybody's mind, their champion is dead. However, you always cut the head off a snake. Snakes had actually a very slow metabolism from what I can understand. And even a severed head on a snake is actually a very dangerous thing. And people are bitten by severed snake heads every year and sometimes die from them. Their metabolism is so slow, it actually takes them a while to die, even when you cut off their head. It's still a very dangerous thing, but that's what you do with snakes. The seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. There are more stories that we could look at, but we just don't have time. But we start tracing this theme that's going on through Scripture, and the fact that God's promise, I will destroy you, is constantly under threat. And yet God always preserves it. There's a warning here. There's a challenge really here to all of us. Trust me. Trust me. Israel always struggled with that. We often struggle with that. We're like, I don't know if I can really trust God. And then we start seeing these stories and we start seeing these connections and realize God's like, no. You can trust. Look at this. The promise is always under threat. But I will always come through. I will always send a deliverer. Always. And he has. Over and over and over again. You can trust him. And that's what we're meant to do. But eventually this promise has to actually be realized. Not just made, not just portrayed, but realized. There's only one seed. Seed can refer sometimes to a righteous remnant, maybe sometimes even a group of people, descendants of someone. But there are places in Scripture where it specifically refers to one single solitary person. And Galatians 3:16 is one of those passages. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. And it does not say into offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. I think, as we were talking about in Sunday school, I think it's one of the reasons why the genealogies are the way that they are. I think they always want to make sure that we can connect back Jesus all the way back to the line of Adam and Eve. That we can connect that and realize like that's a straight line. There's no like, okay, that ended, let's plan B. All right, here we go, and back again. Like there's always, it's just this linear line, and it goes straight back. Seed of the woman, that it connects back, that we can see that. He is the one who will destroy the serpent by taking the guilt and shame that we deserve on himself. That's not how I would have done it. I would have been there in the garden, and I'd been like, oh, where's the shovel? I'm just taking this thing out right now. You know, we had to do that when I was in Pennsylvania. We worked at a greenhouse, and we had these areas, and we had these rolling tables. It's hard for you to understand, but you had these rolling tables, and it was gravel underneath, and our greenhouse was kind of surrounded almost by a moat for whatever reason. Every once in a while, we would get these creatures inside. And the person that was, responsible for water, she starts screaming, and okay, there's a snake over there. And you get the shovel and you go find it. And I remember seeing this one. It was a decent size for what we usually had with a pointy head, which I think is a bad sign. The diamond-shaped head. I think that's poisonous, right? I don't know. I killed it anyway. But you get it, and you're stabbing it as much as you can, trying to cut off its head with that shovel, just so it wasn't a problem anymore. And it still likes to wiggle around and do stuff. We don't like them. We don't trust them. Me in the garden, that's what I have been doing. Where's the shovel? It's done. God doesn't do that. See, because at the end of the day, it wasn't just the fact that the serpent had tricked them. Adam and Eve had followed. Justice still has to be carried out. They are still guilty. Something has to happen here. And we're finally at the point where that thing has to happen. And so now Christ comes, and I think C.S. Lewis portrays this as beautifully and as well as anybody possibly could in his Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, in which I think it's Peter, comes and he's working with the witch there, doesn't realize all that he's involved with and all that he's doing, but he is now guilty. His life is now forfeit. And Aslan volunteers himself to go down there and take his place. And of course, the witch and all her minions, they're ecstatic over this whole thing, and they're jeering and they're cheering as Aslan just very quietly walks between them up to the stone table and lays himself down. It just feels too easy. They're almost in disbelief, like, really, we've got him. You're going to voluntarily do this. And he does, and then she holds up the knife and she stabs him right through the heart, killing Aslan right there on the table. And it just feels too easy, and they walk away like they've won. They've won. Aslan is dead. The one that they've hated, the one that they've tried to kill and destroy for so long is done. What she doesn't realize is, though, that rather than handing her the victory, he's handed her the defeat. It just took a few days for them to realize that. Aslan rises again. The stone table breaks, never to be used again. It's over. Jesus takes the very power of sin when he dies on the cross, and he turns it back on itself so that death itself dies. There's no more power for those of us who are in Christ. Christ is cursed for us. He's cursed for us. Jesus refers to that bronze serpent incident that took place back in Numbers. He refers to that in John chapter 3 when he's talking to Nicodemus and he's trying to explain to him what this means and what's all going on. And he does it in John 3:14. It says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. It is hard for us to realize and understand, like, okay, of all the metaphors that Jesus could have used, he's referring to himself as a snake. That's negative almost in every passage of Scripture. Why does he do that? Because he becomes the curse. He's the one that gets nailed on the stick. That's why he's doing it. It was a lifeless bronze snake because it took the curse for the people, on behalf of the people. Jesus is like, I'm getting nailed to that stick. I'm getting nailed to that cross. I'm taking the curse for the people. Over and over again, we see the seed of the woman being threatened. And then God sends a deliverer, preserves the promise to live another day. And then suddenly the deliverer needs a deliverer. And nobody comes. Because he's not there to deliver himself. He's there to deliver us. And at some point, the seed of the woman had to die. It was the only way. Justice must be carried out. There is no other way. Eve certainly never understood that because it looked like failure. Really, everybody, even the disciples, who were probably more in tune with Jesus than almost anybody else, didn't understand that. Some of the women that were following Jesus, I think, may have put two and two together, at least to a point. But justice had to be satisfied. And Jesus takes our curse so that we can have his blessing, but he rises again. He rises again, defeating the seed of the serpent once for all. And now, that snake is missing a head. He's dead. He's been defeated. He cannot win. He's still very dangerous. But he's dead. His head has been crushed. Promise has been fulfilled. See, this is a theme that's hiding, honestly, in plain sight all throughout Scripture. It makes so much sense of the words of John the Baptist. It makes so much sense of the words of Isaiah and even the book of Revelation. We see that time and time again, but it also tells us something else. This is why life is so hard. This is why the relationships that we have frustrate us. This is why our work is difficult for us and we don't understand why. Because we are living underneath a curse, but we ourselves are not cursed. The serpent is. He will lose. And God has seen to it. Jesus is the one true seed that we've always been looking for, and now death has truly been swallowed up in victory. A victory that can be yours if you take Christ as your deliverer, if you trust him. And you have to actually trust him. You see, as hard as all these things are, it's the one thing that keeps shining through over and over and over again. You can trust this one. Why? Because he's the one that died for you. You can always trust the one who's willing to die for you. He's given us this great gift. And he's laid down his own life to demonstrate, to validate what he has said, that this might actually happen. You can trust the one who died for you. And all through the pages of Scripture, he's showing us over and over and over again, you can trust me, look, you can trust me, look, you can trust me, look. This will happen, and now it has. Will you trust him? Will you trust him with your very life? Will you trust him with your family? Will you trust him with your job? Will you trust him in all these other areas? Like he is trustworthy, and if he's willing to take care of that and go to those lengths to care for us that we might experience his blessing, take his place, why do we struggle in so many other areas to trust God? Trace the themes through Scripture and realize over and over and over again, he is worthy of our trust. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this day that you've graciously given, for allowing us to be able to gather here, to be able to see and trace this theme through Scripture. Something so almost benign as a serpent, something that we're so willing to look over, maybe even just relegate to the Garden of Eden, yet to realize that it rears its head time and time again all throughout Scripture. And we've been blind to it so often. Lord, I am thankful to be able to see this and to realize that you are in fact faithful and worthy of our trust because of what you've already done and accomplished for us. And Lord, if there is anyone in this room that does not yet know Christ as their Savior, that today might be the day that they realize that they need to truly trust you and that you are truly worthy of that kind of trust, absolutely everything, because of what you've already done. Thank you, God, for loving us, even as we are so unfaithful. May we bring you and give you the glory. In Christ's name, amen.